taken. But taken where? According to an ancient manuscript attributed to him, Enoch would have been led through 10 different heavens, each one with its own functions, hierarchies, and mysteries. It describes angels who govern stars, judgment regions, places of indescribable light, and a final level where the divine presence itself dwells. But here the mystery begins. This book circulated among ancient Jews. It was known to early Christian communities. It is even mentioned in the New Testament. So why did he disappear from the official Bible? Why was it considered uninspired? Why did it remain preserved only in the Ethiopian church for centuries? And even more disturbing, if religious leaders knew this content, why has it never been taught widely? Today we will open this topic with a critical and historical mind. No sensationalism, no fear, just investigating old facts and questions that may never have been clearly answered. Because if the 10 heavens described by Enoch are more than a metaphor, so maybe there is a part of humanity's spiritual history which was carefully left out. And the question is not just what was hidden, but why. Enoch is one of the most enigmatic figures in the entire Bible. He appears briefly in the book of Genesis, chapter 5, in the midst of a long genealogy. The text follows a repetitive pattern. Each patriarch lived for many years, had children, and died. But when he arrives at Enoch, something changes. The text says, Enoch walked with God, and he was no more because God took him. Unlike everyone else, Enoch does not have his death recorded. He simply disappears from the narrative. That little phrase sparked centuries of speculation. What does God took him mean? Was he taken alive? Have you been transported to another dimension? Did you receive a special revelation? Ancient Jewish tradition developed this idea in an extraordinary way. According to these writings, Enoch was not just taken, he was led through the heavens, instructed by angels, and transformed into a heavenly being. It is in this context that the so-called Book of Enoch appears. This text, written approximately between the 3rd century BC and 1st century AD, presents Enoch as a celestial scribe, someone who received revelations about the structure of the spiritual universe, the hierarchy of angels, the fall of the vigilantes, and the organization of the multiple heavens. Although the Book of Enoch is not part of the biblical canon of most Christian traditions, it was extremely influential in Second Temple Judaism and early Christianity. In fact, the Epistle of Jude in the New Testament directly quotes a prophecy attributed to Enoch. This raises an intriguing question. If Enoch was respected and cited by biblical authors, why was your book not officially included in the scriptures? Who decided this? And based on what criteria? The figure of Enoch represents something rare in biblical tradition. A man who would have surpassed common human limits and crossed the layers of spiritual reality. And if the account attributed to him describes the so-called 10 heavens, then we are facing a cosmology much more complex than that presented in most modern preaching. But before understanding the heavens, we need to understand the book. And that's what we'll see next. If Enoch was a respected figure in ancient traditions, so what happened to the book attributed to him? The so-called Book of Enoch is not just an isolated manuscript. In fact, it is a collection of ancient Jewish writings produced approximately between the 3rd century BC and 1st century AD. During the Second Temple period, these texts circulated widely among Jewish communities. Fragments of the Book of Enoch were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran, which proves that it was considered relevant by certain groups at the time. In other words, it was not an obscure book. He was read, studied, copied. The content, however, was bold. The book describes the fall of Echo, the Watchers, angels who would have descended to earth, cosmic revelations about how stars and time work, heavenly judgments, and a detailed structure of the heavens. For some later religious leaders, this type of description raised theological problems. The text presents angels with significant autonomy, reveals complex celestial mysteries, and offers spiritual insight, highly structured current of the universe. As the centuries passed, as the biblical canon began to be formally defined, the Book of Enoch was left out of most official lists. The Ethiopian Church was the only major Christian tradition that has kept it as part of its Bible to this day. But this raises a delicate question. If the book was known, if it was mentioned in the New Testament, circulated among the first believers, why didn't it make it into the final version of Scripture recognized by the Vatican and other religious authorities? Was it just a theological decision based on inspirational criteria? Or were there fears about how certain revelations might be interpreted? Important to clarify, there is no historical evidence that the Vatican officially banned the Book of Enoch as if it were a hidden secret. What happened was a gradual process of defining the canon, in which several ancient texts were excluded. Still, the mystery remains, because when an ancient text describes multiple heavens, angelic hierarchies, and detailed spiritual journeys, and then it disappears from the main tradition, it's natural for questions to arise, and perhaps the biggest one is, what exactly does this book reveal about the heavens that does not appear in the traditional Bible? This is what we will begin to explore now. When most people think of heaven, they imagine a single spiritual place, the final destination of righteous souls. Some are familiar with the biblical expression, third heaven, mentioned by the Apostle Paul. But in the writings attributed to Enoch, especially in related texts like Second Enoch, also called Slavic Enoch, we find something much more complex. A structure composed of multiple celestial levels, not just 3, but even 10 heavens. This idea did not arise in medieval Christianity. It already existed within currents of ancient Judaism, where the universe was seen as a layered reality, physical and spiritual at the same time. In this view, the heavens are not just places, but spheres of existence with specific functions. Each level has distinct inhabitants, cosmic responsibilities, different degrees of proximity to the divine presence. The first heavens would be linked to the visible world, atmosphere, stars, movement of time. As you go up, higher dimensions appear, regions where angels rule stars, judgment locations, celestial archives where human actions would be recorded, and at the highest levels the throne of divine glory itself. This cosmology drastically expands the traditional spiritual view. Instead of a single static heaven, we have an organized, hierarchical, and dynamic universe. But here's the crux. If this vision was part of ancient religious thought, why has it virtually disappeared from mainstream Christian teaching? The answer may lie in the process of doctrinal simplification. Over time, institutional theology sought clarity and unity. Very detailed systems about angels, heavens, and cosmic structures could generate divergent interpretations, excessive speculation, or even movements considered heretical. Thus, the simplest cosmology, heaven, hell, and the earthly world, became dominant. But the ancient texts remain, and they describe something much broader than what is normally taught. If the 10 heavens are understood not just as a metaphor, but as a symbolic or mystical spiritual structure, so we are facing a forgotten tradition that points to a spiritual reality much more complex than we imagine. And now, the inevitable question arises, what exactly are these first celestial levels like? That's what we'll see next. According to texts attributed to the Enoch tradition, the journey through the heavens begins at the levels closest to human experience. But even these first levels reveal something extraordinary. The first heaven, the cloud country. The first heaven would be the layer closest to Earth, associated with the atmosphere, clouds, and natural phenomena. In ancient accounts, it is not just a physical space. It is described as a domain where angels oversee the cycles of nature, rain, snow, winds, and seasons. The idea here is clear. The universe does not work randomly. There is order. There is spiritual management even in the climatic details. This vision reinforces an ancient conception. Nature is sustained by divine intelligence. The second heaven, The place of rebellion. The second heaven already has a darker tone. Some versions of the text describe this level as the place where certain fallen angels were imprisoned, linked to the narrative of the Watchers who descended to earth. This heaven is not an ultimate hell, but a region of waiting and judgment. Here, a strong element of the Enochian tradition appears: the cosmic conflict. Spiritual reality would not be neutral. It would involve choices, rebellion, and consequences. This layer introduces a theme that echoes elsewhere in the Bible: the existence of spiritual forces that have not remained true to their original purpose. The third heaven, paradise, and the place of judgment. The third heaven is especially interesting because it connects the Enoch tradition with the New Testament. The Apostle Paul mentions being caught up to the third heaven, but he doesn't go into detail. In the accounts attributed to Enoch, the third heaven would contain two contrasting dimensions: a region of rest and light associated with paradise, a region of darkness where souls would await judgment. This duality shows that even before the final judgment, there would be an intermediate spiritual organization. The third heaven marks a transition. Until now, we are still at levels that maintain some relationship with the human world. But from the fourth heaven onwards, the journey becomes more distant from ordinary experience. The next levels don't just talk about nature or judgment, but of cosmic structures that would support the universe itself. And that's where the description becomes even more surprising. If the first three heavens still maintain some connection with human reality, from the fourth heaven onwards, Enoch's journey becomes completely cosmic. Here we are no longer talking about clouds or waiting regions. We are talking about the spiritual gear of the universe, the fourth heaven, the order of the stars. In the fourth heaven, according to ancient accounts, would be the celestial mechanisms that govern the movement of the sun, moon, and stars, not as inert bodies, but as organized systems under angelic supervision. Enoch describes angels responsible for the cycles of time, days, months, seasons, and years. This reveals a stunning insight into antiquity. Time would not just be a natural sequence, but something managed. This idea reinforces the concept of a universe with purpose and structure, where even the movement of the stars follows an established order. The fifth heaven, the fallen Watchers. In the fifth heaven, Enoch encounters beings described as the Watchers, angels who, according to tradition, descended to earth and taught forbidden knowledge to humanity. At this level, they appear in a state of repentance or waiting, aware of the judgment to come. This part of the account is crucial because it introduces one of the most controversial themes in the Book of Enoch: the idea that part of human suffering originates from previous spiritual interference. Here, cosmology stops being just structural and becomes moral. There is responsibility. There is a consequence. The sixth heaven, spiritual administration. In the sixth heaven, the description speaks of higher angelic orders, beings tasked with overseeing nations, recording human actions, and executing divine decisions. It is as if the spiritual universe works with an organized hierarchy: messengers, warriors, heavenly scribes, spiritual rulers. This structure later recalls the angelic classifications developed in the medieval Christian tradition, such as archangels, cherubim, and seraphim. But here we see an older form of this idea: the seventh heaven, the nearness of glory. Upon reaching seventh heaven, the atmosphere changes completely. Enoch describes a region of intense light, where angels continually glorify the divine presence. Here appear beings described as powerful archangels: Michael, Gabriel, Raphael. The seventh heaven is the limit of structured creation. It is the border between the administered cosmos. It is the direct reality of the glory of God. But it is still not the highest level. Above him are even higher heavens, where human language becomes insufficient to describe what is seen. And it is there, in the final levels, that we find the most mysterious element of this entire narrative. If until the seventh heaven there was still structure, hierarchy, and organization, From the 8th onwards, we enter the territory of the unspeakable. The accounts attributed to Enoch begin to use symbolic, intense language, almost impossible to translate into human terms. Because now we're not just talking about angels who manage, we are talking about the border of divine glory itself, the 8th heaven, the higher order. The 8th heaven is described as a domain of even higher angelic orders, beings of intense brilliance, whose function is not just to execute orders, but to continually remain in the presence of divine majesty. Here, the distance between creature and creator begins to decrease. The atmosphere is no longer one of administration. It's worship, light, sound, constant movement, everything aimed at something bigger. The 9th heaven, the chamber of glory. In the 9th heaven, according to some traditions associated with Enoch, there would be the so-called abode of glory, an environment where the divine presence is so intense that it surpasses any physical form. There is no sun, there are no stars. Glory itself is light. This level is described as a dimension where time has practically no meaning. Here, Enoch does not just observe, he learns. He receives revelations that, according to the text, should be transmitted to humanity. And that's exactly what makes the story so powerful. The 10th heaven, the supreme throne. In the 10th heaven would be the highest point of the journey, the throne of absolute sovereignty, a level above all angelic orders, above time, above matter, above understanding. At this moment in the narrative, Enoch is transformed. Some traditions say that he stops being just human and assumes a celestial condition, becoming an eternal scribe. The Asais. Symbolism here is profound. The human being elevated to maximum presence, not on his own merit, but by calling. And it is at this point that an inevitable reflection arises. If this account describes a progressive ascension to the supreme throne, he suggests that spiritual reality is much more structured and much more accessible than we imagine. But it also raises a delicate question. If human beings can understand such high layers of spiritual existence, this changes the way we see our position in the universe. And perhaps this is exactly why this cosmology never became central to the official tradition, because it broadens horizons and expands responsibilities. If the Book of Enoch was known, if it was preserved by ancient communities, if it was even mentioned in the New Testament, so why has this multi-heaven cosmology disappeared from the center of Christian tradition? The answer may not lie in a secret conspiracy, but in complex theological and political decisions. 1. The canon formation process. Between the 4th and 5th centuries, the Church went through a decisive process, officially defining which books would be considered inspired scripture. The criteria involved wide use in Christian communities, doctrinal compliance, apostolic origin or direct link with the apostles. The Book of Enoch, despite being ancient and influential, did not meet all of these criteria according to the leaders of the time. He was respected, but not universally accepted. And when the canon was closed, many texts were left out, not just Enoch, but also other early Jewish and Christian writings. 2. Theological complexity. The cosmology of the 10 heavens presents an extremely detailed structure of the spiritual world. Hierarchies, levels, functions, intermediate judgments. For a church that sought doctrinal unity in the midst of heresies and divisions, simplification might have been necessary. A leaner theology, heaven, hell, doomsday, was easier to teach, standardize, and defend. Complex systems could generate divergent interpretations, and disagreements at that time meant dangerous ruptures. 3. The Watcher's theme. Another sensitive point is the narrative of the angels who descended to earth and directly interfered with humanity. This story raises delicate questions: origin of evil, transmission of prohibited knowledge, spiritual influence on human history. This type of content could fuel speculation that is difficult to control theologically. 4. Control, or prudence. Here we enter more interpretative terrain. Some argue that excluding certain texts was a way of preserving institutional authority. Others argue that it was a prudent decision, aiming to protect the faith from elements considered speculative. The historical fact is, there is no official record of a Vatican secret ban against the 10 heavens of Enoch. What happened was a canonical selection process, but that doesn't eliminate the most intriguing question. If this cosmology was known, if it circulated in the first centuries, what would have happened if it had remained a central part of the Bible? Would our vision of the spiritual universe be different? Would we have a broader understanding of the celestial hierarchy? Or would this have created even more divisions? Perhaps the question is not whether it was banned, but why was it left out? And what this reveals about how the history of faith has been shaped over the centuries. The central question of this video is straightforward. Did the Vatican know the teachings of the Book of Enoch, including the description of the multiple heavens? The short answer is, yes, I did, but not in the conspiratorial way that is often imagined. Knowledge was never secret. The Book of Enoch was never a manuscript lost in hidden vaults. It circulated in the ancient world. Church fathers, such as Tertullian in the 2nd century, mentioned the book and came to consider it valuable, although they already recognized that it was not accepted by everyone. Furthermore, Christian scholars over the centuries have had access to indirect references to the text. When fragments were found in the Dead Sea Scrolls in the 20th century, it only confirmed something that had already been suspected. Enoch was an important tradition in ancient Judaism. In other words, leader religious people knew of the book's existence. Él nunca fue desconocido. The Vatican Library. The Vatican Apostolic Library, officially founded in the Pailes, 15th century, brings together thousands of ancient manuscripts, including apocryphal, Jewish, and patristic texts. This does not mean that the Vatican hides these texts. It means he preserves them for academic study. The Book of Enoch, especially in its Ethiopian versions, has always been available to researchers. Therefore, this is not institutional ignorance. Tradition knew the content. The question is different. Why did they know, but not canonize? Knowing is not endorsing. Throughout the history of the Church, many texts have been studied without being considered inspired scripture. Apocryphal Gospels, Old Letters, intertestamental Jewish texts. Knowing a document does not mean recognizing it as a doctrinal authority. In the case of Enoch, the decision was clear. He could be studied historically, but not serve as an official basis of faith. So where is the mystery? The mystery is not in a hidden secret. It's in contrast. A text that influenced ancient traditions. It was mentioned in the New Testament, describes a complex cosmology and presents a journey to the divine throne. It ended up relegated to the category of apocryphal, and this naturally arouses curiosity, because when something is excluded from the main narrative, the questions begin. Did the Vatican know? Yes, but he chose not to include it. And perhaps the most relevant question is not whether it was banned, but if we are ready to deal with the complexity that this type of cosmology presents. And this is exactly what brings us to the final point. What does all this mean for us today? After all this, perhaps the most important question is not, why was the Book of Enoch left out? But yes, what does this ancient vision of the heavens awaken in us now? A cosmologia dos 10 céus nos apresenta universo espiritual vasto, organizado e profundamente estruturado. She suggests that reality goes far beyond what we perceive, that there are dimensions of order, responsibility, and purpose above our immediate understanding. But it also reminds us of something essential. Not all ancient knowledge was meant to become official doctrine. Some texts remain as historical tradition, symbolic reflection, or apocalyptic literature. The fact that the Book of Enoch is not in the canon does not mean that it is irrelevant. It just means that the Church, at a certain point, decided which texts would serve as the official foundation of the faith. And this puts us before a personal choice. We can look at these writings as historical curiosity, mystical literature of ancient Judaism, or a tradition that expands our perception of the spiritual world. But regardless of the position we adopt, one thing is clear. The Christian faith was not born in a vacuum. It emerged in a rich, diverse environment full of debates about heaven, angels, and human destiny. Perhaps the greatest value of exploring the 10 heavens of Enoch is not proving that something was hidden, but realize that the spiritual history of humanity is much deeper than we generally imagine. And perhaps the final question is not, what did the Vatican know? But, how far are we willing to explore, with responsibility and discernment, the ancient roots of our faith? If this topic expanded your vision, question, study, investigate. Because the search for truth has never been about fear, but about better understanding what has always been above us. What if I told you that there was an ancient manuscript capable of defying everything you've ever learned about heaven? What if, behind the walls of the Vatican, in the archives of Christian tradition, and in the halls of religious history, there was knowledge about a much more complex structure of the spiritual world, something involving not just one heaven, but 10 heavens. The title of this video may sound bold. The Vatican knew the 10 heavens of Enoch and decided to ban the revelation. But before any judgment, before any hasty conclusion, we need to take a deep breath and look at the historical facts, the ancient texts, and the questions that have spanned centuries. Most people only know the traditional idea of heaven and hell. Some have heard of the third heaven mentioned by the Apostle Paul, but almost no one talks about the cosmology described in the Book of Enoch, an ancient text associated with one of the most mysterious characters in the Bible, Enoch, the man who walked with God and was no more because God took him. This little phrase in Genesis has always aroused curiosity. He didn't die. He was not buried. He was taken. But taken where? According to ancient traditions preserved outside the traditional biblical canon, Enoch was led through multiple celestial layers, a spiritual journey that reveals angelic hierarchies, ical structures, cosmic structures, and levels of proximity to the divine presence. And here, the real mystery begins. The Book of Enoch is not a modern invention. Fragments of it have been found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. He was known to Jewish communities of the Second Temple period. It was mentioned in the New Testament in the Epistle of Jude. For centuries, it remained preserved in its entirety in the tradition of the Ethiopian Church. Then the inevitable question arises: if the content was known, studied, and respected by the first religious communities, why was it not included in the official Bible recognized by Rome? We are talking about a text that describes 10 heavens, 10 organized, spiritual levels, where angels rule stars, where there are regions of judgment, where there are heavenly archives, and, at the highest levels, the very throne of divine glory. This is not just theology. It is a complete cosmology. It is a much more detailed view of the spiritual universe than that taught in most churches today. But was this vision really prohibited, or simply left aside during the canon formation process? Did the Vatican know these writings? Yes. But what does know mean? Is studying a text the same as accepting it as doctrine? Before we delve into theories, we need to understand the historical context, the religious environment of the time, and the decisions that have shaped the Christian faith over the centuries. Because when we talk about Vatican secrets, forbidden books, occult knowledge, and 10 heavens of Enoch, we are touching on themes that mix spirituality, history, tradition, and institutional power. And perhaps the most important point is not to accuse or defend, but to investigate. Investigate with an open mind. Investigate with critical sense. Investigate knowing that the history of religion is much more complex than simplified versions usually show. If this topic arouses your curiosity, if you have heard about apocryphal texts, fallen angels, watchers, multiple heavens, and want to understand what is historical fact and what is speculation, then you are in the right place. Because from now on, we will begin to explore who Enoch was, what his book really says, and how this ancient narrative of the 10 heavens crossed the centuries until reaching the present day. And before we continue this journey through the mysteries of the Book of Enoch and the possible echoes of this knowledge within the Christian tradition, I need to make a very important invitation. If you really want to understand this content in depth, without sensationalism, without fear, and without hasty conclusions, actively participate in this video. This theme involves biblical history, apocryphal texts, the Vatican, angels, multiple heavens, and decisions that shaped centuries of faith. It is not a superficial matter. It requires reflection, analysis, and dialogue. So I want to hear from you. Have you ever heard of Enoch's 10 heavens? Do you believe that certain texts were simply excluded due to historical criteria? Or do you think there is something more behind this? Leave your opinion here in the comments. Your participation enriches the discussion and helps other people to broaden their vision of this profound topic. And if you value content that explores biblical mysteries, ancient books, the history of Christianity, and little-known revelations, leave your like now. This shows the platform that this type of content needs to reach more people interested in knowledge, spirituality, and historical investigation. And of course, subscribe to the channel, because in the next videos we will continue exploring ancient texts, forgotten traditions, and topics that are almost never covered in a balanced and detailed way. When you subscribe, you're not just supporting the channel, you're choosing to be part of a community that seeks to understand, question, and deepen faith responsibly. Now that you're part of this conversation, let's move on. Because to understand the 10 heavens described by Enoch, we first need to understand who this enigmatic character was, and why his brief appearance in the Bible generated one of the most intriguing traditions in religious history. To understand why the Book of Enoch arouses so much curiosity when we talk about the Vatican, forbidden texts, and hidden revelations, we need to look more closely at the central figure of this narrative. Enoch is not a common character within the Bible. It appears briefly, almost silently, amid long and repetitive genealogies. But it is precisely in this brevity that the impact lies. While other patriarchs lived, had children, and died, Enoch breaks the pattern. The text states that he walked with God. This expression within the ancient Hebrew context suggests intimacy, closeness, deep spiritual alignment. He wasn't just someone who was religious. He was someone who lived in constant communion with the divine. And then you see the phrase that has gone through centuries of interpretation, and he was no longer because God took him. He doesn't die. He is not buried. He is taken. This absence of death made room for something powerful within ancient Jewish tradition, the idea of ascension. And this is exactly where the narrative of the heavens begins to take shape. According to the writings attributed to him, Enoch was not just taken, he was led through the layers of spiritual reality, witnessing invisible structures, angelic hierarchies, regions of judgment, and progressive levels of glory. This is what makes the Book of Enoch so different. He is not just prophetic, he is cosmological. It describes an organization of the spiritual universe. It talks about angels responsible for elements of nature, for the movement of the stars, for recording human actions. It introduces the figure of the Watchers, beings who would have descended to earth and changed the course of humanity. It speaks of revealed knowledge, of surpassed limits, and of spiritual consequences. Notice how this broadens the debate. When we talk about 10 heavens of Enoch, we are not just talking about a symbolic number. We are talking about a detailed structure that suggests order, levels of authority, gradual proximity to the divine throne, a spiritual ladder, a progression. And here comes an important point for those who follow topics such as the Apocrypha, the Vatican, books excluded from the Bible and ancient mysteries. During the Second Temple period, these ideas were not marginal. They circulated. They were part of the religious imaginary of Jewish communities. They influenced the apocalyptic thinking of the time. They did not appear in a vacuum. Over time, when Christianity began to organize itself institutionally and define the biblical canon, there was a clear need for standardization. Widely accepted texts remained. Others, although respected, were left out. The Book of Enoch fell into this category. It hasn't completely disappeared, it was not erased from history, but it no longer occupies a central position. Does this mean ban? Not always. It means canonical exclusion. And canonical deletion changes everything. Because what is not considered official scripture loses space in common teaching, in preaching, in doctrinal formation. But curiosity never died, mainly when scholars rediscovered ancient fragments, when researchers began to analyze connections between Enoch and passages from the New Testament, when themes such as fallen angels, celestial hierarchies, and multiple heavens regained interest within the niche of biblical mysteries and ancient revelations. And this is where the conversation gets even more interesting. Because the idea of multiple heavens is not completely foreign to the traditional Bible. The Apostle Paul himself mentions the third heaven. This implies a structure. It implies levels. It implies that the spiritual vision of antiquity was not as simplified as we often think today. What Enoch does is expand this structure. He describes the first heavens linked to visible creation, then levels where intermediate judgments occur, regions where angels administer the cosmos, and finally upper layers where divine glory manifests itself in ways too intense to be described in human terms. This generates fascination, but it also creates discomfort, because such a detailed cosmology raises questions about spiritual authority, about the role of angels, about the origin of evil, about human responsibility within a spiritually supervised universe. And perhaps it is exactly this level of detail that made the text too complex to become the official basis of institutional faith. Now I want to bring you even deeper into this reflection. When you hear about 10 heavens, what does that awaken in you? Curiosity, skepticism, fascination, distrust? Do you believe that faith should only be limited to what has been officially canonized? Or do you think ancient texts can expand our historical understanding without necessarily replacing doctrine? Comment below phrases like, "I want to understand more," "This changes my view," or even, "I'm skeptical about this." I really want to read your position, because from here, we will begin to go deeper into the description of these celestial layers and the impact that this vision can have on the way we see the spiritual world, religious authority, and the so-called mysteries of the Vatican. And the next point of the journey begins exactly when Enoch crosses the first level of this invisible reality. And if you've made it this far, to the end of this video about the Vatican, the Book of Enoch, and the 10 heavens, that already says a lot about you. It means you are not satisfied with superficial answers, that you enjoy investigating biblical mysteries, ancient texts, apocrypha, forgotten revelations, and everything that involves the history of faith and deep spirituality. So I want to ask you, Gone Special, if you actually watched until the end, comment below on the sentence, "I went to the 10th heaven." This way I will know who really followed this complete journey. And more than that, also write your main reflection. After this video, was it the part about Enoch? About the multiple heavens? About the canon formation process? I want to know what moved you most. If this content expanded your vision, raised questions, or helped you better understand this controversial topic, leave a like. This simple gesture helps the video reach more people interested in biblical mysteries, the Vatican, banned books, and ancient revelations. And of course, subscribe to the channel, because here we don't just stay on the surface. We explore historical context, forgotten texts, theological debates, and everything that almost no one explains in a clear and balanced way. And now, don't stop here. The next video that appears on your screen continues exactly this line of investigation. If you're interested in Enoch's 10 heavens, you need to watch what comes next. Click on the next video and continue this journey, because the more you seek to understand, the deeper the knowledge becomes.